Europe was bleeding. By 1940, Nazi Germany had crushed France, dominated most of the continent, and pushed Britain to the brink. The skies over London thundered during the Blitz as families huddled in shelters, listening to bombs rain from above. Across the seas, America watched, not yet fully in the war, but preparing. In the East, the Soviet Union battled desperately against Hitler's invasion, losing millions in the process. It was clear, if Hitler was to be defeated, a new front was needed in Western Europe. A second front to split German forces and relieve pressure on the Soviets. The idea of an Allied invasion across the English Channel took shape. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin debated, argued, and demanded action. Finally, the decision was made. The Allies would launch the largest seaborne invasion in history. Its code name, Operation Overlord. But the question remained, could it succeed? From a British diary, June 1943, "We know it must come." The invasion, but how many of us will still be alive when it does? From a German soldier's letter, "We wait on the coast. The Führer says we will throw them back into the sea. But in truth, I fear the sea will swallow us instead." The road to D-Day had begun. The Allies knew they had one chance. Failure would mean disaster. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, a calm but determined leader from Kansas, was chosen as Supreme Commander. His job was almost impossible. Unite armies from across nations, coordinate the largest amphibious assault ever attempted, and keep it all secret from the enemy. Secrecy was everything. To deceive Hitler, the Allies launched Operation Bodyguard, a master plan of espionage and trickery. Fake armies, inflatable tanks, wooden planes, and even a phantom commander, General Patton, were used to convince the Germans that the invasion would strike at Calais, not Normandy. Meanwhile, engineers designed landing craft, planners mapped tides and beaches, and soldiers trained endlessly for the storm to come. A Canadian sergeant recalled, "They told us we were part of something bigger than history. But at night, alone in our bunks, we thought only of home, and whether we'd ever see it again." The invasion was not just a military operation. It was a gamble of human lives, thousands of them. The invasion force was not just American or British. It was a coalition of nations united by one cause. Troops came from Canada, France, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Norway, and more. Resistance fighters prepared inside occupied France, ready to strike when the signal came. For the soldiers, it was personal. From an American GI to his wife, "By the time you read this, I may be gone. But know this, I fight so our boy can grow up free." From a free French fighter, "Tomorrow I fight not as a soldier, but as a son of France. Our land will be free, or I will die with it under my boots." The men trained with rifles stormed mock beaches and listened to commanders speak of glory. Yet behind every face was fear. A British private later admitted, "We laughed, we joked, we sang songs before bed. But inside, each of us wondered, will I still be alive tomorrow?" This was the human tide, gathering on the southern coast of England. Hundreds of thousands waiting, watching the horizon, knowing the greatest gamble in the invasion was ready, but the sea and sky had the final say. Weather in the English Channel was brutal. High winds, rough waves, and thick clouds threatened disaster. Allied meteorologist James Stagg made a call that would change history. Despite conflicting forecasts, he predicted a brief break in the storm. Eisenhower gathered his commanders, the tension heavy in the room. He paused, then gave the words, "Okay, let's go." Across southern England, orders rippled through camps. Soldiers wrote final letters, priests offered blessings, and men lay awake staring at the canvas of their tents. German commanders, however, were unprepared. Field Marshal Rommel had gone home for his wife's birthday, believing no invasion could come in such weather. This stroke of fate would prove costly. From an American paratrooper, "We sat in the dark with our packs on, each of us silent. It wasn't bravery, it was waiting for fate to pick who lived and who died." The clock ticked closer to June 6, 1944. The greatest gamble of the war was hours away. Before dawn, the first blows fell from the sky. Thousands of paratroopers of the U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne, along with British and Canadian airborne units, leapt into darkness. Their mission: to cut roads, seize bridges, and block German reinforcements before the beach landings began. But chaos ruled the night. Scattered by flak and heavy winds, many dropped miles off course. Some drowned in flooded fields. Others landed in enemy villages, fighting for survival from the moment their boots hit the ground. Private John Steele became legend when his parachute caught on the church steeple in St. Mary-Glise. Dangling helplessly, he played dead while German soldiers passed below. Hours later, Americans stormed the town, freeing him, yet for every miracle there was sacrifice. Entire sticks of paratroopers vanished, cut down before they could regroup. But even scattered, they fought on, blowing bridges, ambushing patrols, sowing confusion in the German rear. A British paratrooper later wrote, "We were alone, cut off, but each of us became an army of one." That night, every man fought like a division. The airborne spearhead had done its job. Bloodied but unbroken, they had opened the way for the invasion fleet. As night fell on June 5th, an armada unlike anything the world had seen began to move. Over 5,000 ships carried more than 156,000 men toward the shores of Normandy. Above them, 11,000 aircraft roared across the sky. The channel churned with vessels of every kind: battleships, destroyers, landing craft, and supply ships. The horizon itself seemed to move with steel. A U.S. Navy sailor recalled, "You couldn't see water, just ships as far as the eye could stretch." It felt like the ocean itself was at war. Naval guns opened fire, pounding German fortifications. The sea shook under the thunder of shells. Engineers and sailors worked frantically to guide landing craft into place, battling waves and enemy fire. On deck, soldiers tightened their chin straps and whispered prayers. They clutched rifles, photos of family, and letters they might never send. This was the moment of no return. If you were among them, standing on a landing craft heading toward fire, would you have had the courage to step forward? Comment your thoughts, and remember to subscribe to keep their memory alive. The Armada was approaching the beaches. The world's eyes turned to Normandy. What awaited them was beyond imagination. Dawn broke on June 6, 1944, and with it came the bloodiest battle of the invasion, Omaha Beach. The U.S. 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions hit the shore against towering cliffs, mined beaches, and German bunkers spitting fire. Machine guns cut down men before they even left the surf. Bodies and wreckage floated in the waves. Landing craft burst into flames. Chaos reigned. One survivor remembered, "The sea was red. We hit the beach and men dropped everywhere. You didn't run forward. You crawled, prayed, and hoped you weren't next." Medics worked under relentless fire, dragging the wounded to cover. Engineers blew gaps in barbed wire while machine gun nests tore through their ranks. For hours, it seemed Omaha might fail. But small groups of men clawed their way up the cliffs, silencing bunkers with grenades and sheer will. By sheer courage and sacrifice, the tide turned. By nightfall, Omaha was secure, but at a cost of nearly 2,000 American dead. To the east, British and Canadian forces stormed Sword, Juno, and Gold Beaches. They too faced minefields, artillery, and fortified bunkers, yet their determination carried them through. At Juno, Canadian troops suffered terrible losses in the opening waves, but fought inland with ferocity, securing villages under heavy fire. British forces at Sword pushed toward Caen, battling stubborn resistance. At Gold, specialized Hobart's Funnies, modified tanks with flamethrowers and mine-clearing devices, proved life-saving innovations. A Canadian officer wrote, "We lost men every few steps, but we could not stop. Juno was stained with blood, but we made it ours." Behind enemy lines, the French resistance struck with sabotage, cutting railway lines, ambushing patrols, and guiding Allied troops through the countryside. Their courage, often overlooked, saved countless lives. By day's end, the Commonwealth beaches were secure. On the western flank, U.S. forces landed at Utah Beach. Strong currents carried them nearly 2,000 yards off target. Confusion spread until Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. The oldest man in the first wave made a fateful decision. Surveying the scene, he declared, "We'll start the war from right here." His calm leadership turned a mistake into a success. Casualties were light compared to Omaha, and within hours, U.S. troops pushed inland, linking up with airborne divisions that had fought through the night. One paratrooper recalled, "When we saw the boys from Utah, we knew we weren't alone anymore." The invasion was working. By June 6th's end, all 5 beaches, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword, were in Allied hands. The cost was high, but the foothold in Normandy was secure. If you had been there on June 6th, which beach would you have landed on? Omaha's hell, Juno's blood, Sword's fire, Gold's resistance, or Utah's gamble? Tell us in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe to honor their sacrifice. The beaches were won, but the battle for Normandy was only beginning. Ahead lay the Atlantic Wall, the villages of France, and the unimaginable price of liberation. Hitler had promised that his Atlantic Wall was impregnable. For years, German engineers built bunkers, artillery nests, and minefields stretching from Norway to the French coast. But on June 6th, ordinary soldiers proved that walls can be broken. Allied engineers waded ashore under fire, cutting through barbed wire with Bangalore torpedoes, clearing mines with their bare hands and blasting paths through obstacles. Casualties were heavy. Men collapsed in the surf before they even reached the sand. One U.S. combat engineer recalled, "We carried explosives on our backs. One hit and the whole squad was gone, but we had to make a way forward." The others depended on us. By evening, battered and exhausted, the Allies had cracked the Atlantic Wall. The door to France was open, but victory came at a devastating cost, not only to soldiers, but to civilians. In Normandy's villages, families hid in cellars as bombs shook the earth. Houses collapsed, farms burned, and children cried in the dark. Thousands of French civilians died in the crossfire of liberation. From a survivor in Caen, "We prayed for freedom, but when it came with fire. We lost neighbors, friends, and family. We were free, but the price was terrible. French resistance fighters paid dearly too. Many were captured, tortured, or executed for aiding the Allies. Yet their bravery, cutting supply lines, guiding troops, and sabotaging German defenses, was vital to success. Liberation was real. But liberation was not without tears. Once the beaches were won, another battle began, the battle of logistics. Armies needed food, fuel, weapons, and medicine to survive. Without supply, the invasion would collapse. To solve this, the Allies built artificial harbors known as mulberries, floating piers and roadways anchored off the coast. Incredibly, these man-made ports allowed the Allies to unload thousands of tons of supplies each day. At the same time, engineers laid Pluto, the pipeline under the ocean, carrying fuel from England to France. Truck convoys rolled across dusty roads, keeping tanks and soldiers moving forward. A British driver remembered, "We weren't on the front lines, but we knew if we stopped, the whole army stopped." Every mile we drove felt like another step toward victory. Behind the glory of battle, it was logistics, the quiet, relentless work of engineers, sailors, and drivers that kept the foothold alive. Would you have chosen to be on the front lines, or would you have been one of the quiet heroes keeping the army supplied? Comment below, and if this story grips you, don't forget to subscribe to support this channel. The Allies had secured their foothold, but the Germans were not finished. Counterattacks loomed, and the struggle for Normandy was about to become even bloodier. The Germans were stunned by the landings, but not broken. Field Marshal Rommel and his commanders scrambled to launch counterattacks. Panzer divisions rushed toward Normandy, clashing with Allied troops in brutal tank battles. For civilians, this was terror reborn. Villages became battlefields. Entire towns were reduced to rubble as German artillery pounded the countryside. The smell of smoke, the sound of shells, and the sight of fleeing families became the backdrop of war. Yet even with ferocious resistance, German forces were stretched thin. Fuel shortages, Allied air superiority, and Hitler's refusal to allow flexible defense doomed their chances. Still, The fighting was savage. Normandy became a graveyard for thousands, soldiers and civilians alike. If the beaches were a nightmare, the hedgerows of Normandy were pure hell. These centuries-old earth walls, lined with thick trees and brush, turned the French countryside into a fortress. Soldiers advanced yard by yard, facing hidden machine guns, snipers, and ambushes. Every field became a deadly trap, a U.S. soldier recalled. You never knew if the next step was your last. The hedgerows swallowed men whole. To break through, Allied engineers improvised. They welded steel prongs to tanks, rhino tanks, that smashed through the earthen walls. Slowly, painfully, the Allies pushed forward. The hedgerow war was one of endurance, grit, and improvisation. It showed that victory was not just about firepower, but about adaptation in the face of relentless obstacles. By late July, the tide turned. Operation Cobra unleashed a massive Allied offensive. Bombers shattered German lines, tanks poured through gaps, and suddenly the stalemate broke. German forces collapsed into retreat. Tens of thousands were trapped in the Falaise pocket, a slaughter that marked the beginning of the end for Nazi occupation in France. And then came the moment the world had waited for, the liberation of Paris. Crowds filled the streets, waving flags, embracing soldiers, and celebrating freedom. After 4 years of Nazi rule, the City of Light shone again. But victory was not just France's. It belonged to every soldier who stormed the beaches, every civilian who endured the fire, every resistance fighter who dared to fight, and every life lost along the way. D-Day was more than a battle. It was the turning point of a world war, a moment when courage, sacrifice, and unity changed history forever. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, and share this documentary and comments on this documentary for better experience. Your support helps keep history alive so that the sacrifices of those who fought for freedom will never be forgotten.